My entire presentation is technically all demo, but I did want to make sure I did the normal house cleaning things for the guys who put this all together. So my name is Stacy Deere Strole. I'm going to be doing a session on Microsoft 365 Admin Center, really how to kind of set it up for you, and then focus a little bit on reporting and SharePoint and how to really get the most out of it. Unfortunately, we only have 50 minutes. There's a lot you can talk about in the Admin Center. However, if interested, I've done entire workshops on the admin and I have recorded them. I always record these sessions because I don't do slides for it. If you would like to see the bigger, presentation, just, message me at the end or, tomorrow, whatever, and I can send you a link to one of those videos. All right. So again, my name is Stacy Deere Strole. I am a Microsoft Office Services and Apps MVP. I own a company called Focal Point Solutions, based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, but essentially people everywhere, clients everywhere, and our sole focus is Office 365 or Microsoft 365, SharePoint, etc. All the things that integrate with that. We love it. You will find my contact information. My running joke is I'm not an attorney, so if I'm going to travel or do these types of things virtually and train people, if you have a question around things that I have trained you on, or just in general, you email me or give me a call. I'm not going to charge you, and I'm going to answer your question. So feel free to reach out. You got my social media stuff out there. I've written a couple books. I got some content that I do for my blog that I do personally and for the company, so you're more than welcome to check those things out. And if you're a huge fan of managed metadata content types like I am, I've written a couple books or co-authored a couple books with some people. Feel free to check those out as well. And that is as much as I like to talk about myself. Mark your calendars. SharePoint Conference in Microsoft 365 has been moved to March 23rd through 25th of 2021. So please, keep an eye out for that. Hopefully, we all can get back together and share some fun times in person. Virtual is awesome, but it's nice to have that one-on-one time. Thank you to all of our sponsors. I know it's a little different format than we're all used to, but nonetheless, the sponsors are very, very important, and I, really thank them. You guys ever get the opportunity, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, just pop out to their pages and say thank you, appreciate everything you guys do, that kind of thing. Make them, that makes them want to continue doing this. Means we're listening. And also, if you're someone who really into the whole virtual thing, there is a raffle. They are giving away 3 Oculus Quests, all in one systems. I have to say, I'm not a big, virtual person when it comes to games and whatnot, but probably because I just never have time. And I probably don't want to have time because then I probably get addicted. But anyways, she totally should sign up and try to win these. I'm sure it'd be a lot of fun for you, your kids and family and all that. Sorry. And also, we have a GoFundMe charity where we're doing 10% of all the funds from the sponsors go to just support community relief. So please consider helping out and donating for the Medical Corps in United Way. I think that's a great thing that these guys have decided to do, and we should all support each other in these interesting times that we have to be going through. And then now we're going to go over and we're going to go through the demo with everything. And I don't know, I think I heard that I don't have a moderator, but if I happen to keep talking and anybody sees I run close on time, just let me know. You can come off mute and speak up. I'll switch back to this at the end, but we would really love it if you guys could provide some speaker feedback along with event feedback. I'll bring this back up once we get to the end, but just wanted to give you guys a heads up if you've not seen that yet. All right, and yes, those are my little angels, not so angels. All right, so this is Microsoft 365 Admin Center. This is essentially the home page. And the cool thing about this is it can be different for every person who has access to the M365 Admin Center. So I can really set this up for the things that I care about the most, which I think is really great. Like notice I have user management, the message center, which we will get into, but it's one of my favorite areas. Data loss prevention, and then training guides, or what's currently on my screen. But if you notice up here, you have the ability to do, light mode, dark mode. So if you're someone who doesn't like the dark, look and feel, you can go to light mode and it'll automatically adjust. And I am going to apologize. It seems like every tenant I've been into today seems a little slow. But you have the ability to also add cards. So, and that's what each one of these little things are. Typically, I look at them and I think web parts, just like you do on the SharePoint sites, but they call them cards in here. But if we click Add Card, you're going to see a list once it comes up here. And these are different cards that you have that you can literally, so like drag and drop onto your screen. So if you're someone who deals with Azure Active Directory on a regular basis or GDPR, you can add whatever your focus is to your page when you go to the Admin Center. And you're only adjusting it for yourself. So you're not making any changes for anybody else. It's just for you. And it's just that easy. It's literally just dragging and dropping. So there's one thing I always suggest to people, because one thing people don't utilize that home page because they don't realize how easy it is to actually manipulate it. So definitely something I would, look at to set up. And of course, you can remove any of these. Just, they're just little, like I call them little web parts. And notice you can just move them however you want to. So that's always key number one for me. But the very first thing I kind of want to talk about, and notice we're already getting a not responding, is the message center. The one thing I like about the message center, or I like a lot of things about it, but essentially what Microsoft has done is given you a way to see the insight of things that are being deprecated, things that are new, issues that have come up, and how to, and know when they're going to be adjusted and changed. If I can get this to stop, there we go. There we go in here, go to the message center. But this is also something just very much like the home page. You can set it up to cater what you are responsible for. One thing is Microsoft's this huge beast, and for someone to know end to end about everything that is relative to the M365 tenants and all this kind of stuff is a big challenge. And honestly, I doubt that there's anybody out there that can really do it anymore because of how big it is. However, like I said, you can really tailor it to you. You can actually go out here and set the preferences, and notice we're still spinning. So I'll just kind of go through these things while it's going through. But oh, there we go. But notice it has a list of different things, and it tells you, and it has little icons, what's teams, you can see access, group stuff, you name it, and then, what type of feature they are. So if it's a, different categories, if it's, hey, just an FYI or stay informed, hey, there's a change coming, so you can plan a change, and it provides you a lot of information, like the last time it was updated, when it's supposed to, go into play, etc. So notice under the preferences, now if this is up, you have a whole list of different things here. Now, what you want to do is go out here and select the things that pertain to you that you need to keep updated with. So, like, I don't do Exchange, I'm not a huge Kaizala person, we don't use Skype anymore. So I can go through here and change what I want and what I don't want. So then I can really focus on the things that I care about and spend my day utilizing, or my week, or what I'm supporting. So I can go out there and select the preferences that I want. And then notice I can actually have labels now too. So if they're not labeled, or there's labels for data privacy, if I want that type of information, I can get it or not. But then how do you want to get it? right? So you can say, send me a weekly email digest of all the messages, where literally you get an email, it goes through all of the different changes, the stay informed, plan for this, deprecations, the whole 9 yards. You can get an email to send just for any major updates. So I technically get 2 emails. I'll get one for the weekly, tells me all about the digest of all the messages, but then I actually get one tells me about the major updates. So I have something to focus a little bit more in depthly on. And then what I do is then reuse this information and relate it back to clients that I work with. I'm like, hey, this is going to be a huge impact to you. Make sure you read up on it, ready for the change. Here's what you need to do to prepare. So it gives you some insight so you can work with your different departments or your different clients, etc. And also, one of the new ones, again, is send me emails for data privacy messages. Then you can identify, notice, a primary email address that you want to go to. So you would set it for your email address. However, also notice that you have other email addresses. So what is really cool is if you start thinking a little bit outside the box, and say you have in like a a site, IT site or something you want to share with everybody in the organization, create an email address for one of those, and then you can have certain types of preferences go to that email account. Then, so essentially you can put it into a list and then have a little web part, you can put it on your intranet. So it's a way you can utilize this to actually help keep your users informed of these changes as well. There's a lot of changes that are going on. In the fact that Microsoft is going with this whole maker thing, so someone who doesn't have to be a developer can develop things in Flow very easily, or Power BI, etc. Now, we don't always know what they're doing because they're learning these skills and they're implementing them in their sites. So what we need to do is find ways so that we're keeping them updated, that they can see, hey, there's a change coming to Power Automate on the Flow side, or to Power BI, or to whatever they're doing in their site. And they are getting that information the same time you are. So you're no longer, like, from a lot of times people always think that IT or support or whatever is always the bottleneck because we're not getting the information out there fast enough to them. This is a way that you can utilize information that Microsoft is supplying and easily get it out to them, and they get the information the same time that you do. Now, the great thing is not only do you have that ability, but it's what Microsoft is providing during this. So once this saves and goes away, we'll open up one of these here. Sorry for it being a little slow here. But notice here it says updated, new feature, poll added to Outlook. So if we select this, we're going to get a pop-up here. And notice it says the last time it was updated, and then it tells you what this is all about. The end users will no longer need to download the quick poll add-in. It's essentially going to be built into it. Here's what the rollout process is. How does this affect me? And what you need to do to prepare for it, etc. Microsoft has documented it for you. They've provided you all the information, it even associates other tickets to it, to the roadmap if you're someone who follows the roadmap. Also notice that they've provided you pictures to show you how it's going to work, right? So the great thing is they've already documented it. You don't have to write anything up. So if you're, if you think about being in training, or if you have a knowledge base, or like I said, set these up so that this information goes straight into some type of a list or library and reutilize the information so your users can get to it very quickly. It's almost, Microsoft is providing you this great little knowledge base that you could literally put into your day-to-day system for them to get their information. You can set it up in the admin panel to allow other users to have read access, meaning they can get to the message center, but then they don't get to any of the other admin features, which I think was a great idea. And I was all for it. But ultimately, I really don't want to have people go out here to someplace they've never been. I've gotten clients that I have asked me to set that up. I've ended up with more questions about what else is in the admin center and this and that than it was really worth. Having the information filtered to another location so that they're seeing it in like a knowledge-based searchable type of thing seems to work a whole lot better. But if you're in here and you happen to see something, you have the ability to hit share here. And this is where you can start to think, if you've worked with somebody that you know this is going to have a major impact to, you can literally send them an email. So you can say, all right, I know Ryan is using this every day, and I wonder, he might not know that this is going to change. So I'm just going to send Ryan an email. I'm going to say, well, go ahead and send it to me so I remember. And I also want to add a personal message. So then I can say, hey, Ryan, oops. I know we set this up and now it's going to change. Right, so I can put any of the information that I want to in here to him. Of course, it's still being a little slow. And then once I just have my message typed in there, then I can say share. And then an email is going to go directly to Ryan, right? Or again, like I said, if you wanted to send it to another list or library and capture the information that way, you could add additional notes and have those display as well. I've had some people utilize Flow to bring information from here into SharePoint, etc., and then utilize it in like IT to really help the users support themselves and help IT easily find things that that affect their day-to-day, and they don't have to come out here. Unfortunately, if you're an admin and spend a lot of your time in the admin center, that is probably something you've never heard anybody say, or you're like, hey, why do people go out to the admin center? People don't go out to the admin center unless they absolutely need to do something in the admin center, whether that's create a new user or create a new site or set up something in the security and compliance. Other than that, they don't go out here. So, you know, you're never going to drive them out here to go check out the message center. So if you can pull that information out and display it somewhere else, it'll be a lot more powerful for your users. Since this is going so slow, I'm just going to go ahead and cancel out of this. But that's essentially, you know, your message center. And then I have no idea why we're being so slow, so I apologize for that. While we're waiting, does anybody have any questions? Oh, there we go. All right. I apologize for slowness. I don't know why everything's all of a sudden slow once I've connected to this live meeting here today. All right. So one of the other things before we get into the SharePoint admin panel, which we'll spend a little time there, is the other thing is really setting up your tenant for your company. And they have supplied some information, as you notice up here, if you see this whole little pink bar, that is something that is actually controlled in the admin panel, not part of the branding or the theme or anything like that inside of, you know, when you're in your sites. It is actually, you know, maintained out here as part of what they call the organizational profile. Of course, this is all running very slowly. Come on. I know they've had some problems today, and I guess I can see what they've been running into now. All right. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go under settings here, see if we can get this to expand. Okay, this is becoming interesting. All right, let's go here and see if this one will actually run any faster. I have a feeling it's not that, but anyways, we'll try this one. All right, So if I go to setup here, so I want to make sure I show my all here. This is actually what I want, settings, my organizational settings here. Then you have organization profile. So this is where you can do some really cool things for your individual company. One of the first things is custom app launcher tiles. And what this essentially does is allow you to add different, applications to your Waffle. Okay, so you have Stream Planner and all this stuff. If you're directing users to go there to swap from one to the other, you can add any custom ones. So like if you're using some expense system like Concur or some other CRM system or whatever, you can easily add those tiles. When you come into the custom app launcher, you can do add a custom tile, give it a name, the website URL. So we'll just do a Google real quick here. And the URL of an image. When it comes to this, the great thing that you can do is you can say here, and you can do say like Concur, and then go get an image. So go over to images here, just pull this one up. All right, like okay, so I'm going to copy the link to this. I'm going to go right back over here, and I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to say Concur. Now, when you hit save, it does have a minor timer job that it's running on the back end. So it'll take up to, the longest I've ever waited, I think, is like 10 minutes. And then once I go back to the Waffle, then you can actually see the third-party application that you've added underneath all apps. So it would show up here in alphabetical order. And then you have next to the 3 dots, you would see an option to add it to your favorites, which means when you add it to your favorites, it's literally adding it up here so that it's very quick and easy for you to find. So great way to add on those. Custom themes. So this is a great way to actually add some information or, look and feel to your actual tenant. You can actually choose a custom logo. You can upload the image or from a URL. Keep in mind though, when you're choosing images, you need to make sure that you're following the image upload rules here because it will scream and yell at you until you get it right. You also have the ability to make this logo clickable. Now what logo it's referring to is the logo that actually would show up here on one of your sites, right? So if I go, let's say if I go here, notice that this says SharePoint, I could have that say focal point or whatever, and I could make it clickable to whatever URL that I wanted to go back to, meaning you could have it go back to your intranet site, okay, which is the most common. You can also select a background image, which means if you want little stars or whatever. So like if we go here, notice in this background that you will see is notice it's black, but it has some little stars. That's a background image, right? So, or you could just you could make it a color. So if you wanted it black or brown, or in the dev environment, like I showed you, I had it pink. And then you could change the actual color of the icon as well. Any accents that you had, buttons or whatnot. And then you have some options. So prevent users from overwriting their theme. So if you spend a lot of time and effort in making sure that your teams are very cohesive, or your sites are very cohesive from one site to the next, making sure it matches your company standards, colors, logos, etc., you may want to select this so that people cannot change it. Okay. And then you have this option, show users display name. So notice up here, it actually has my name. But if I unselect that and I hit save, it essentially is just going to do the whole, it would just do like my initials, SD. Again, anything you do here does take a few minutes to take effect. So there's timer jobs, like I said, in the back end that actually updates those. And now you see the little SD and just my icon here. So you have the ability to change stuff like that. A lot of times, depending on the issue that you might be having when you're dealing with Microsoft, they will ask you, where is your data located? Now, typically, if you're in the US, it's going to be in the US. and overseas, depending on where the data centers are, it's probably more relevant to them because they have a lot more options to where things might be located. But essentially, this will tell you exactly where your data is sitting. So this can be very important, especially when it comes to compliance and whatnot. And the only time I always felt like this was something odd that they asked me, because I'm like, well, that's going to be US, right? We went out there and looked because I was having some major resource issues, and went out there, and the tenant was actually overseas somewhere. So when the tenant was spun up, for one reason or another, it actually did not spin up in the proper place. I don't know if the client had selected something weird during the setup or whatever, but they had to essentially move the tenant from one location to another. So they will occasionally ask you this information, and that's how you find it. The other cool thing is you can set up desktop or help desk information, which is essentially just adding, you can say help desk or whatever you call your help desk, contact information, so a phone number, an email. So if you have like support, if you have a URL, so say you've got a ticketing system, you can actually put the URL of the ticketing system. So we'll just put Google in here just as an example, right? And then we can put help desk ticketing system, so whatever you want to call it. And then you can just hit save changes, all right? So once that saves, again, like I stated, you do have some timer jobs and whatnot that you have to wait for. But after it completes, from any site that you go to except inside the admin panel, if you go to the help option, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll notice you'll see all the help desk information down here that we just entered. And then they can easily select, call, and whatnot from right here. Okay. Keyboard shortcuts. So this is something relatively new, but you actually can set up some keyboard shortcuts for, add a user, reset a password, add a contact, groups, and there's some universal shortcuts and stuff that are out there. Like I said, this is fairly new. I have a feeling that we'll see some additional shortcuts come down, but you have some built-in ones here. All right. I have a feeling we're going to be able to change these and adjust these as well. If you notice right now, so it's just pretty much telling you what those shortcuts are. Organizational information, essentially the information about your company, all the information out here. So if your technical contact changes or phone number or your location, this is where you would go and adjust that information. When you submit a support ticket, it's pulling information from here to identify what time zone you're in, who to contact, and it essentially sets those defaults, right? And then last but not least, under here, your release preferences. So if you're in a production environment, typically you just want to do the standard release for everyone, meaning, I want to make sure that everything's thoroughly tested and be fixed before it rolls out into my production. But you should always have some type of a dev tenant, especially if you do a lot of Power BI and coding and Power Automate and Power Apps and all that kind of stuff. Or you have custom branding and whatnot. You should always have an area where you're testing that before it actually goes into production. And the other thing is when you have that dev and tenant, you want to be able to do a targeted release, meaning that you have you're getting the latest and greatest from Microsoft before it gets released to production, so that you have the opportunity to test it out before it actually gets to production. So if it's new feature and functionality, gives you the opportunity to test it. Hey, we're going to use this, or hey, we're not going to use this, so let's go ahead and turn it off. Because Microsoft's gotten a lot better at giving you that option ahead of time to turn it off before it gets deployed to you. Great example was when Microsoft released groups. By default, it was turned on for everybody, and then all of a sudden everybody had all these groups, but they didn't know what they were for, and it really, the impact to the environments. They had a lot of site collections that no one used because they didn't realize they were creating these site collections. There was at the time a PowerShell command you could run to turn it off for everybody and then turn it on individually per person. So great it's a great opportunity for you to update your governance, identify what you guys want to use, don't want to use, or how it impacts your overall environment prior to it getting released. You can also do a targeted release, but only for specific people. So if you have a dev tenant, or you don't have a dev tenant, but I would suggest highly getting one, you could have certain people in production, say, or dev or QA, whatever you're using, and say these people are going to get the targeted release, but everybody else is not. And I say you could do that in production. I would still suggest not doing it, but you could. But the reason I wouldn't is because it's typically you're giving that to someone who's in IT, either does support or development, and then now their experience in production is now different than yours, and you're in the same environment. To where if you're doing it in a dev environment, there's a clean difference between dev and production, but you do have the option to do it either way. All right. Any questions so far? And I don't know if I have a moderator, so feel free to come off mute and ask. Any questions? Are we good? Ashley, do you see any questions? I'm sorry. Any chance?
No worries. I'm looking through.
Okay. Right. Just let me know. All right.
So we do have a couple.
Okay.
So we do see one here. How do you set up a dev tenant in M365?
Mm-hmm. So a couple different ways. I mean, it's just like setting up one in production, but one thing I would find out is depending on the size of the company and the licensing you have, there are some organizations I've worked with where they actually get a dev tenant for free. Others, what I tell them is you literally just go set up a tenant by going to the Office 365 site and do new, but only get the plan that you need. So like if you only need it for SharePoint or you need it for SharePoint Exchange, then get a tenant based off of whatever you need. But you want to make sure the license is equivalent to what you have in production. So like I have just a SharePoint tenant, but all this functionality, the plan that I'm using there is equal to my E3 that I have in production. But the great thing is you don't need as many licenses. So you only need like 3 or 4 licenses or whatever, how many people are actually going to use it. So the price of that dev tenant is very minute compared to your production, because you're not, you don't have to do an entire E3, E5 suite, and you can have just, a small subset of users to utilize it. But same process is just, you can just name it something dev, like mine is like FPS dev. So you can do something very much like that.
So a related question looks to be, is a dev tenant part of our license?
It can be. You will have to talk to the people that work in your licensing. Like I said, there are some organizations that that I work with that got one free, part of their agreement, and then I have some that they literally have to purchase it separately.
Cool. One more before you go on.
Okay.
So how can you give access to another user to read the messages from the message center?
All right, so let's see if we can go back to this without it blowing up the message center again here. So, where's my message? Oh, there we go. I gotta remember where it's at now. All right, still waiting on it here. I'm trying to remember now if it's in here, if it's in. It's not in here. It's moved. Now I'm trying to remember. Tell you what, right after this, before I start my next session, I will, because it was under one place and then it moved. What I'll do is I will document real quick and I'll throw it out there on Twitter. And so if you follow me at SLDeere, I'll post it out there for you. Because I know we're just really short on time because we only get 50 minutes. I want to make sure I get through a couple things, but I will get you that answer. Sound fair?
There you go. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. All right. So we went through that. So one thing that we won't take a deep dive into, but I want to make sure that everybody's aware, is Microsoft has done a lot of great things around reports in the Admin Center, and they plan on doing a lot more. So notice you've got usage, security, and compliance. and Microsoft Managed Desktop, which things are being used, what kind of, versions and whatnot. But they've already have some out-of-the-box reports that you can use. And I'm a huge person when it comes to reports, because not only can you get this really nice visual picture, also notice the reports that they've given you. You can do 7, 30, 90, and 180 days. But notice you can easily just unselect and really pinpoint the things that you're wanting to see and see trends for these. The other thing is if you see the breakdown here, right? You can see like Microsoft 365 Analytics, it of course takes you to Power BI because that's what it uses on back end. But if you click into one of these, notice that you have the ability to export, meaning you can take this data and import it into SharePoint and do dashboarding. So when it comes to usage on sites, so if you have sites that haven't been used in 60 days or less, you can actually pull this information from the admin panel and put it into SharePoint and then literally tie analytics and BI to it and literally see your usage and user adoption either grow or decline. And being that you have access, meaning you can export this stuff, you can also tie in a flow to kind of help you, manually do this instead of, automatically do it instead of manually do it. So if you get the chance, I definitely go out and check out the reports, and they have options where you can create your own reports as well. So let's go over to the SharePoint because I want to make sure we definitely hit this one. And so here's the SharePoint Admin Center. Again, notice you can drill down in here. They've automatically got file activity reports, but you can go into them, SharePoint site usage reports that they have in here. And then notice you have your message center and then the service and health, right? And you can see all services or just your SharePoint. I try to keep things very much based off of whatever admin center I'm in so that that's what I'm focusing on at that time. So cool thing here is when you go to active sites, so what we're used to see all the time under the classic is you saw your top level site, you saw your search, and then any site collections. Well, then we had the groups come about and teams come about and all those types of things. And if we were to see this in the classic version, you don't see any of those things, just FYI. So if you're not using the new version of the admin center, make sure you start utilizing it, because every single client that I go into and there's defaults to the old view of the admin center have no idea how many actual sites that they have in their environment. So they go out here because people have created groups because they never disabled that functionality, so they have a ton of sites. I had a client that they said, well, we only have 6 sites, but something really wasn't right with their tenant. I went in here and they had 756 sites. So they had no idea that they had all these group sites and stuff created. But the thing that I really like is notice you can actually export all this information. So again, reporting built in. Whenever you do migrations from on-prem to the cloud or whatever, the first thing you do is something that you call an assessment. What kind of information do we have? When's the last time it was used? Is it still valid? How much content do we have, and all that kind of thing. Well, you can actually get that information right out here, right out of the box, without having to use a third-party utility or a PowerShell script to do so. The other thing is that notice I've got a ton of columns here. But if you go over to the far right, you have where you can customize your columns. And then it actually shows you all the ones that you have available. So, site name, URL, how many hubs do you have? You want to identify what is a hub and what's connected to a hub. Last activity, when it was created by, storage limits, how many files are viewed or edited, page views, visits, how many files, is there sensitivity, and are they being shared externally? Also notice that you have arrows to make it go up or down, meaning you have the ability to change where this information shows in your report. And I call it report because ultimately when I apply this, I'm updating this view, but ultimately I'm doing this because I want to get a report of what I'm looking at for my sites, right? So when you bring this down, you're actually literally seeing all this information, what template, last time it was, last activity, which then means you can sort, you can put this into SharePoint list, you can do them BI on how many active sites you have versus sizing, all that type of stuff. So you can reuse this information. And also let you know, is there an Office 365 group attached to it, the external sharing and all this stuff. So they're providing you a lot more information than we've ever had before. And you can easily, like I said, put this into SharePoint and get some visualizations for management on the most active or least active and, average sizes and that type of stuff. Those are always things that people want to know, and it's never been a real easy way to do that unless you use a third-party utility or, you PowerShelled it. And now it's just right out of the box, and it gives you a lot more information than we've ever asked for before. All right. On creation, so a couple of things. When this actually says create a team site, it's referring to essentially what the template is going to say, because the template will say team site. If it's an old version, classic, it will say team site classic experience. And if it's the new, it just says team site. But it is actually an Office 365 group site. So just keep that in mind. And I'll show you why here in a minute. And then you have the communication site, which is the new, essentially a really quick and easy way for you to build an intranet site, make it a hub, tie your other sites to it, right? And you also have a new, versus for the whole COVID thing, the new crisis communication site template. So you do have that, and then other options. So the reason why I like to show this one is notice immediately which template comes up. It is team site. There's a difference. So the other team site was literally what we would call a group site. This is the true team site replacement for the old classic team site. Okay. So again, just like any site, you just want to give it a name, right? Then notice here that it says site address, and then you have these drop downs. So you have sites and you have teams, so you can identify what they are. And then you have the URL. Now notice I am putting in verbiage up here, virtual marathon, and look what it's doing to the URL. Notice it's just taking out the spaces and putting them there. Best practice, for one, you want to keep your URLs as small as possible, because when you start adding then your lists or document libraries and then namings of documents underneath of them, you got to think about your character limits, all that kind of stuff. Notice you have an edit option here. So you can edit it and literally take out all the extra verbiage, or you can just call it like say TMV, that kind of thing. And then it will automatically check to see if it's available, and you can actually see the URL. So notice I went from this really long name where they just took out spaces to making it much smaller. And then of course you have adding your primary admin. You can select your language that you want. Under advanced settings, by default, when a tenant is created, defaults to Pacific. There is an actual tenant setting so that every site that you create, you can change it to whatever your time zone is. Otherwise, every time you create a site, because sometimes I forget when I'm working with a client who hasn't set that, that's defaulting to Pacific time. So then you would have to go in manually after the fact to change it. And then also by default, this is the storage limit that is identified. Also a global tenant setting where you can actually go and set this to whatever you want to limit your storage to for a site. Just because it has the potential of getting this big, do you really want them to get that big? No, because the bigger they are, it will impact performance. I love the rule of thumb staying around 100 gig and not to really exceed 200 gig, mainly because you have to start thinking about your backup and your restores, because you got an SLA. If you go down, what is your time frame that you have to get that back up? And the bigger and bigger that you allow these sites to get, the longer it's going to be for you to be able to get it back up and running. So you really have to base, how big you really want your sites based off of your recovery time. So once you have all your information, you of course just hit finish and it creates your site out here. Okay. You also have deleted sites now. where if I was to delete a site, it would come out here. So say I named it wrong, or I chose the wrong template or whatever. If I go out to then recreate that site, it may tell me that that site already exists, and you're like, I deleted that site. The problem is it's not really a problem. What it's doing is saying it already exists because it's sitting out here in deleted sites. And the reason is because you can now do a restore. And because you can do a restore means that you would literally be trying to overwrite one that's already there. So it does throw this little red flag. If you truly don't need the site because you made a mistake on naming or whatever, make sure you go to your deleted sites and delete it permanently out here. Otherwise, some of the things that you can run into, especially if you use Planner, in Planner, if you create a new plan, you can actually create a site from within that plan. If there's already a site with that name, it will actually append a number at the end of it. And then people don't know where those come from, and that's essentially because you're getting duplicate site names. And so it appends it and doesn't even really tell you unless you look, you kind of miss that piece. Okay. All right, and then you've got some policies on sharing. Now, the reason why I always wondered why, in the beginning, why OneDrive Admin Center shows here and doesn't show in the other. And the reason is because these two are identically the same when it comes to here. So notice here, right now they're both set to most permissive, but if I move SharePoint down, look what happens to the OneDrive, right? If I try to move this up, notice OneDrive can't be higher when it comes to, being permissive as what SharePoint can. So they can be the same, but OneDrive can never be higher than SharePoint. So these things they're very connected to one another. So whatever you say here is also setting it underneath the OneDrive Admin Center and vice versa. Okay. You have some external sharing settings here. If you want to limit by domain, some companies will leave it, wide open. They can share with whoever they want to, and some of them, depending on compliance and security and all that kind of stuff, they can only share with certain companies or whatnot. So you have the ability to say by domain. You can allow only certain people in a security group to share externally. You can make guests sign in using the account to which they were sent like an invitation originally. You can allow guests to share items they don't own or not. And the one I do like is people who use verification code must re-authenticate after X number of days. And I always like to make mine expire so I don't let the links be available forever and ever. So you can set things like that. You can choose a link type that's selected by default. So like anybody in your organization or specific people, or just anyone that has a link can get to it, right? So you can change these options here and then set it, essentially setting the global tenant settings for this. Use permission that is selected by default for sharing links. So you can say, hey, by default, we only want people to view things, or by default, yeah, they can edit. It just is based off literally your governance that you've set up. Show owners the names of people who have viewed their files in OneDrive, so it allows you to know who's seen it. If they say, yes, I've seen it, or no, I haven't seen that, you can prove one way or the other, kind of some auditing. Let site owners choose to display the names of people who viewed the files or pages in SharePoint, and also use the short links for sharing files or folders, which is essentially the equivalent to setting up a bit.ly URL, so it shortens that up. So you have those different types of settings that you can set. These are things I would suggest going, because some people don't realize that they're really allowing the users to share more than they really want them to. All right, access control. This is where you can look at your, and you actually have to have the mobility and security license for this, but you can, any unmanaged devices, idle settings. If it hasn't been used in X period of time, you can have it automatically log people out. Network locations and apps that don't use modern authentication. Do you want to block them? Do you want to allow them? Those types of things. Right. Under settings, default admin center. Which one do you want to use? The new one versus the old one. allow users to create and comment on modern pages. So by default, you can set up all modern pages to say no comments, or by default, I want them all to have comments turned on. Now, unfortunately, if you've got like 100 pages and then you go out here and change this setting, it's not going to go change those 100 pages, but you could script it easily enough. The global settings for site creation, when I talked about like the times, or like your region, your size, your time zone, all that kind of stuff, this is where you would set that information, and then of course site storage limits. Content services, this is the new the term store, and I actually call it new, only because I'm a little giddy and excited because there's some new functionality around all of this now. With you can do some mapping and stuff like that. That could be a whole nother session, which I will probably eventually do, and I know we're running a little low on time since we only have 50 minutes. But if you're someone who deals and manages metadata and you're very familiar with it, I would definitely go out here and check this out with some of the new settings and whatnot that they have around term sets and groups and all that kind of stuff. Notice you have like usage settings, your navigation, and then you've got some advanced where you can actually do some translation and custom properties where you're mapping things. I've done some really cool new things with some of that. So if you haven't checked that out yet. Of course, you have the migration. If you're doing migration from on-prem to Office 365 and you don't have metadata and a lot of complicated things, you can actually use the migration manager. And then they've got a couple of new ones with the desktop tool and the cloud content migrations. Like I said, most of this is new, and you can do like a whole entire session on all that kind of stuff as well. Advanced is just the API access, so essentially any of your applications, approve them. And then here under more features is where you have your original term store, which actually I think they finally updated this, so it goes to the new one with the new settings. Here's where you can see your user profiles, search, secure store, and all those. A lot of these are being updated or going away, but this is still how you can access that information. But yeah, most of them are being updated. Like I said, term store just got updated, and I know user profiles they've been working on. But when you go there, it looks identically the same as what you're used to when you were on-prem. So it hasn't really changed a whole lot, just a lot less settings, but it looks essentially the same. Okay. And that is pretty much it on that. The only one other thing that I wanted to make sure that you do, if you get the opportunity or you have access to the admin panel, is one of the other things that I always like to have people go check on is underneath security. You have a section called the Microsoft Secure Score, right? And notice this tenant has a 52 out of 238. So it has varying items for identity, data, device, apps, and infrastructure. Depending on your licenses and things that you have deployed will depend on what your last secure score, what your maximum secure score could be. The first number shows where you are in that realm, meaning to me in this environment, 52 out of 236 or 38, this is not a very secure environment, and there are some changes that need to happen to make it more secure so that you don't have people that can come in and hack your company, steal your content and your data. So if you get the opportunity, definitely a place to go check. And when you're in here, you can actually pull a report on the things that need to be addressed, and you can work with your security team and network team to get those taken care of. All right, I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time, but any questions?
So we probably have time for at least one here. So let's go ahead and pick one. So is there an advantage of O365 group team sites over a team site without the Office 365 group? So team sites and Office 365 groups.
Yeah. So Well, interesting enough, it can be a progression. So if you just use the regular team site that replaces the classic, means essentially, for one, you still like the same permission, like it's something that's, you know, for this department, you're never going to share externally. But the problem is you don't have the interconnectivity to like the Teams app. You won't have Planner. Now you can still link Planner to it, but you don't have the ability to utilize, you know, create a new plan inside of it. So there's functionality that's just not available, right? But the great thing is you can start with the team site template, and then underneath the cog, you know, the little cog that you have here, if it's a team site, you have an option to actually change it into a group site. And when you do that, then you can have the additional, you know, the additional information, so you can create a group and all that kind of stuff, and then share externally and follows those different rules that you would have for those. So you can do it in progression. It's really, you got to focus on really what you want to utilize. My next session I'm getting ready to do on Planner and stuff like that, I kind of go through some of that stuff on what's available in those and what's not, and that's how I kind of intertangle Planner and whatnot. So it'll give you a little bit more information if you're interested, and I think that session's next on the other channel, I believe. So, do we have another one real quick?
So we're running right up against the hour here. So we could probably screenshot the rest of these and send them over on Twitter if you think. I know you've got to run to your next one.
Yeah, if you will screenshot those for me, Ashley, then I will answer every single one of them, and I will post the answers out there on Twitter. And then you guys can, so don't forget your speaker feedback. But here's my slide and here's my Twitter handle. Just make sure you're following me. And as soon as my next session is done, then I will answer those questions and I will post them out there for you.